Now we will continue with Professor Aniceto Masferrer from Valencia, from Spain. And the topic is another very interesting legal document, the so-called Cortes of León, which dates from 1188 before the Magna Carta, and probably is the first such legal documents we possess today, and makes the start of this kind of political thinking on shaping and at a certain level limiting royal powers. Please, Professor Masferrer, the
Thank you very much.
Yours.
Thanks for the invitation. I'm glad to be here. It's the first time I am in Budapest. I am excited with the city, although the weather is not very nice today, but that's a minor thing. So it's a difficult position to be here and to talk close to great colleagues, with the people sitting here in the panel and with Professor Sir Baker looking at me. I don't know, he's now looking at me. But anyway, be patient. I cannot do things as you do, because we are a great scholar, Professor Baker. So many of the things, or some of the things Professor Baker said in his presentation could be repeated somehow here. But I will try to summarize this because I have 20 minutes and I will try to stick to the time I have, 20 minutes. Now it's almost 11 o'clock and I will cut once 20 minutes have been, this is my idea. So, 13th century, the Carta, Magna Carta, 1215. The Hungarian Golden Bull, 1222. So it's the 13th century, it's the beginning of the 13th century. And why the 13th century? Because royal power arises in the 12th and 13th century. If there is no royal power, there is no reason to limit the royal power. So when we have a power, so then we experience the need to put limits to the royal power. So in the 13th century Europe, many jurisdictions, countries such as England, France, the Holy German Empire, Italy, Poland, Hungary, and Spain, among others, put limits to royal power. And in fact, we could say that the precedent of the rule of law, of the principle of legality, and even the precedent of parliamentarism, or even the idea of pactism, took place in that century. So in that century, 13th century, in Spain was composed of a variety of kingdoms that operate independently with autonomy. That's the case of Castile, the case of León, that were united in the 13th century in 1230. That was the case of Aragon and Catalonia. They were different kingdoms or territories that were united in 1137, Valencia, that was reconquered in 1238, Navarre, the Balearic Islands, the Basque provinces. So we had a variety of kingdoms, most of them, leaving aside or except the Balearic Islands and the Basque countries, they had parliaments. So parliamentarism started in the different territories of Spain in the 13th century. So which means that, of course, this idea that the king cannot govern alone, that he needs the counsel, the advice of other people, was even earlier than that. This is the idea of the curia regia, the curia, who helped support the king in making some decisions. But the parliament was another thing. So this curia was not just composed of nobles, both secular and ecclesiastical, but also by citizens, the representatives of the cities. That was of the 13th century. This is the idea of parliaments, as we already know. So, when was the first time this happened in Spain? This idea of limiting the power through parliamentarism, through Cortes, we say in Spanish. Parliaments in Spanish are Cortes. So in Castile, the first Cortes, we have the idea that it was not the king was supported or received the advice not only by nobility, by nobles, but also by representatives of the cities, was in 1214 in Castile. So in Aragon and Catalonia, there was because that was after the union of Catalonia and Aragon, that was 1137, we said. So in exactly the same year, in 1214, there was the first parliament in the Crown of Aragon composed of Catalonia and Aragon, so the same year as Castile. And in León was even earlier, was 1188. Was that the first document we saw that there is a limitation of power, even in that case, not only in terms of application of the rule of law, but also from a parliamentarian perspective? Is that the first document we have in Spain limiting royal power? So I would say that there is another document, even more important, that is the Fueros of Sobrarbe, which are from the first evidence we have of these fueros are at the beginning of 11th century, 1119. But the issue is that we have no copy of that. The first reference is precisely of that year because of the Fueros of Tudela. They make a reference of that. And as Professor Baker said, this was revived in the 16th century. Why many of these medieval documents were revived in the 16th century? Because it starts this idea of absolutism. So the territories feels the need to limit royal power, and they use the medieval documents to say to the king, well, this is the way we do things here, so you cannot do everything you want. You have this document. So, but I don't want to talk about these Fueros of Sobrarbe, whose first reference, as I said, is 1119, but I want to touch upon a text with more evidence, a document that we can rely on. So, and let's see. So this document is, as I said, I don't want to take off the Sobrarbe, which is very interesting because it's in a context of repopulation, of reconquest of Spain from Arabic power, from Muslims. So the question was that in some territories conquered by Christians, they had no power, so people had to organize themselves. And in this context of reconquest, in Aragon and Navarre, that were united for a long time, there rises the idea that here first laws and then the king. In Spanish is antes leyes que reyes. We had laws first, and then after laws, the king, the royal power came here, which is a quite powerful idea from the perspective of the rule of law. So we have this law, and having this law, you came here, so you have to respect this law. And normally this is a requirement in order to get into power. So you will crown, but first you have to give an oath that you will respect our laws. So then in that context is other documents which are a bit later in the 13th century. For example, the Privilegio de la Unión of 1287. But it was an interesting document, but not connected to cities. That was pretty much what happened with John I in England in 1215. So the nobility pushed the king in a way that was in a desperate need to get the support, and he was willing to sign whatever, almost whatever. And he signed that. That is the privilegio de la Unión. So, but let's go to the text. I would like to refer more specifically. So we saw here that in the 19th century in Aragon, we have some towns of Aragon and Navarre. We had some fueros, fueros de Aragon of 1283, or Navarre 1238. We had the Privilegio General, I just talked about, and Privilegio de la Unión of 12. Privilegio de la Unión is 1287, and 4 years earlier was the Privilegio General that affected the citizens, this document. And then the first Cortes of Lérida of 1214. This is an interesting document. I referred earlier, we're talking about these Cortes of 1214 of Catalonia and Aragon. So why then I want to focus on León? Because we have good evidence of that. So Alphonse IX took power in León in a very difficult situation, and he convoked we know of three Cortes. The first Cortes was 1188. The second time he convoked the Cortes was 1202, and the third and last time was in 1208. These are the three Cortes he summoned with all the people, not only the representatives of the nobility, both ecclesiastical and secular, but also the citizens. So the document that justifies the title of the paper I'm presenting now is precisely this: the Cortes of León of 1188 and their decreta, their decrees. Why? Why this document having such a variety of texts over all the 13th century? The reason is because there is a clear evidence about the celebration of these Cortes, 1188. This cannot be denied, because Alphonse IX invited citizens from different cities of León, and he repeated this as I said, twice, 3 times. And another interesting thing, that we have 2 bodies of laws from these Cortes of 1188. The so-called decreta, in Latin, decrees, and some constitutions against violence and thieves. So I'm looking at the watch. Good. So this decreta, I would like to focus on this decreta. This decreta, they have 17 chapters. 17 chapters. So the Carta Magna of 1215 is much longer than this decreta. That's clear. So why these decreta are so important? Why are so important? Because they reflect a strategy to strengthen royal power by obtaining institutional support rather than the weakening of the monarch's power. That's a very peculiar thing of this decreta. And they express also how royal power was strengthened through the adoption of a wider representative assembly, or a parliamentary system, if you want to call it. So the Cortes of León and this decreta pursued to maintaining justice and ensuring peace in the kingdom, resorting to the rule of law and somehow the principle of legality. and on the other hand, enhancing the joint participation of common people, the people of the city, his representatives, in the discussion of the matters that affected to all the people, to all the kingdom. So what happened in León in 1188 would spread and become common in other jurisdictions some years later. The German Diet in 1232, the English Parliament in 1265, 77 years later, the French General Estates in 1302, so more than a century later. So leaving aside the importance of these Cortes of León from, I would say, a parliamentary perspective, these decreta are perfectly comparable to the English Magna Carta in terms of defending some principles connected to the rule of law and judicial guarantees. So if we have a look at the decreta, at the text of the decreta, you will see some of these ideas. So, for example, it says the first chapter expresses a royal commitment to observe and contribute to compliance with customs established by Alphonse the Wise, but Alphonse the Ninth antecessors. Why that? Because in León, at that moment, 1188, the city was ruled by a law approved in 1117. So it was a way to say, well, and this law was approved by the Council of León. So the king was saying, well, I'm going to be bound by this law. So I'm not above this law, so I have to respect this law. So perhaps the most interesting precepts, depending on the time, I can go further or not, but I want to make clear some of the aspects of the text. But let's go, for example, Professor Baker recited some of the clauses of the Magna Carta. Some of them were the clause 39 and 40. I would say that somehow, not exactly the same, but very similar, were 3 chapters contained in this decreta of the Cortes of León of 1188. So the clause 38 of the Magna Carta said, no free man is to be arrested or imprisoned, or deceased, or outlawed, or exiled, or in any other way ruined, nor will we go against him except by lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land. That was the clause 39 of the Magna Carta. The following chapter, so the clause 40 says, it's much shorter, says, we will not sell or deny or delay right or justice to anyone. So these are the clauses 39 and 40 of the Magna Carta. So if we go to chapters 2, 3, and 11 of the decrees of the Cortes of León, we will see that although it's not identical, it's very similar, the content. The chapter 2 says as follows: I decree and swear that if someone had come to me with an accusation against another, without delay I will inform the accused of the accuser, and if he is unable to prove the accusation that he made in my curia, in my court, he will suffer the punishment that the accused would have suffered if the accusation had been proven. That is the second chapter. Chapter 3 says as follows: I also swear that For the accusation that would be made about someone or for slander of him, I will never cause him harm or damage to his person and properties until he's subpoenaed in writing to respond to justice in my curia in the manner that my curia determine. It follows a bit more, but let's go to the 16, which is very short, chapter, which says as follows: I also order that nobody should go to trial in my curia or to try in León, the city of León, unless for those reasons for which he should go according to their own ancient laws. It's quite clear, the rule of law. So nobody should be tried unless something is done wrong according to the law of León. And this law of León dated back 1117, as we said. So if we have a look, I think I have, well, I think I should start finishing because it's just 20 minutes, so I have to finish. So I have to say what I said I would do. So perhaps these are the reasons. Well, this text is important also for another reason. It was never abrogated. And it was not abolished because it get into the fuero juzgo. I mean, the translated version, the Spanish version of the Liber Judiciarum, that was a text from the Visigothic Spanish kingdom. So that was added as a kind of appendix of the fuero juzgo, and the fuero juzgo was abolished in the 19th century in the context of the codification movement. So this text was well known and never was abolished. So perhaps for all these reasons, on the 19th of June of 2013, I mean, for a legal historian, this is the day before yesterday, 2013, the UNESCO recognized the Cortes of León as the cradle of parliamentarism, and the Decreta was declared Memory of the World for being the oldest written document of the parliamentary system in Europe. Perhaps more important than that is what the UNESCO said, is that the Cortes of León and to its Decreta reflects how a king, for the first time, put the power of law above his own power, and not vice versa. So the first precedent of the rule of law and the representative democracy can be found in 1188. It may be that it was even earlier, but we don't have clear document giving evidence of that. In León, a city, as I said, that enacted or had enacted the fuero in a council presided by Alphonse V in 1117. So they knew what the law was about. Thank you very much.